Well, an official welcome to Unit 3 on Sunday morning to our New Jersey wildcard team. My name is Emily Voss. I'm the We the People coordinator for Virginia, and I'll also be serving as your timekeeper. I'm joining you this morning from James Madison's Montpelier, so you have lots of good Madison vibes coming your way this morning. Our three judges today will introduce themselves momentarily, and then they'll ask you to introduce yourselves and your coach. And from there, we know that you know that this is going to be question 2 today, but they will read it out for the benefit of the recording. And then you all know the drill. You'll do your prepared statement and we'll get into some great questions. And it'll be a fun conversation. I assure you, your judges are very nice people, and they're on the lookout for just a great few minutes with you all this morning. So with that, let me go ahead and hand things over to your judges.
We like it when Emily is our facilitator. She talks nice about us then. Other times we don't know, but she talks real nice about us when she's bringing us on. Dr. Paulson, are you well this morning?
Yes, sir. Very well, thank you.
Good, I'm glad. Who are these people that you brought to see us this morning? I'm Mike Miles. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, and your teacher is well known and well regarded. And I love it when they say a team is New Jersey wild. I want to find out what's wild about you in a few minutes, but I'm sure you'll make that very clear. Dr. Stewart, you want to say good morning to him? Unmute. Yeah, unmute.
Sorry. Yeah, my name is Joe Stewart. I teach in the political science department at Clemson University in South Carolina, but I did spend a year doing research up in Princeton. And back then I was younger and dumber and refereed high school basketball. So I have been booed in gyms around New Jersey. And I don't believe it's your high school gym, but there were some people that thought I was blind even back then. But I'm looking forward to having this conversation. Relax. We're going to have fun today.
It was good preparation for him. He gets booed in his classroom at Clemson a lot of times now, so that was good practice for you, yeah. Right? Dr.
I'm Donald Rogers. I taught history at Central Connecticut State University before retiring shortly ago. I judged We the People for many years. It's a great program. And again, relax. We're looking forward to hearing what your comments are.
We sure are. I'm Mike Miles. I'm from Birmingham, and I love judging New Jersey because y'all get in as much trouble up there sometimes as we get into down here. So I feel like I'm home whenever I judge you. Let the four of you tell us who you are this morning so we'll know you and we'll get going.
Sure. I can start. My name is Ishan Pandya. I'm a senior at Windsor Plainsboro High School North, and next year I'll be attending the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University.
No kidding. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ashley Moritz. I'm also a senior at West Windsor Plainsboro High School North, and next year I'll be attending Rutgers for economics, philosophy, and pre-law.
Oh my soul. Oh, good.
Hey, I'm Ian, and I'm also a senior at West Windsor Plainsboro High School North, and next year I will most likely be attending Case Western Reserve University.
Wow.
Hello, my name is John J. Zigane. I am also a senior at WWP North.
Ashley, I drove past Rutgers one time. I remember it's a beautiful campus. That's as close as they would ever let me get to the admissions building. I'll guarantee you that. They would never.
Mike, let me retract my statement. I believe I have been booed in your gym. So.
Oh, you have. You have. I know. Right after you came out of Ollie's barbecue, I think they booed you a little bit. I don't know.
So
I'm sorry.
Let the students formally introduce their teacher.
Sure.
And our teacher is the great Mr. Paulson. He's helped us a lot this year, so can't thank him enough for everything he's done.
Good for you. That's a good thing to say. I say that Emily has to talk nice about us here. Albert, this is the best they'll be to you, probably, right? Put it on camera, but you're right. We talked the last session about how I remember every civics teacher I ever had and remember them very warmly. If he gets you this far, you're home free from here. I know you know this question by heart, and we're ready to listen to you. But for the purpose of the recording that Emily is doing, let me read it real fast. This is the first time I've read it today. This is a quote from a letter by John Adams. Of course, there's nothing I dread so much as a division of the republic into two great parties, each arranged under its leader and in opposition to each other? What issues led to the formation of the original political parties? To what extent have those issues persisted in American political parties? Really? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of a unified or divided government? We could talk to you for about 3 hours on this stuff, but we've only got about 12 minutes with you. So the first 4 are all yours. You ready? You may begin.
When George Washington gave his farewell address, he saw the rise of Jefferson's Democratic Republicans as well as Hamilton's Federalists. In his infamous farewell address, he went as far as to give a warning. Washington believed that political parties would allow for, open quote, ambitious and unprincipled men to be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to try to usurp for themselves the reins of government, close quote. This very statement reigns true to this day. Many Americans pledge more loyalty to their parties than to the nation as a whole.
The original political parties were formed over issues regarding the ratification of the Constitution. While they started out debating how to create the new government, it later evolved into a conversation about how the government should function, specifically how powerful the federal government should be. The Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, believed in a strong central government and an industrialized nation. The Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, wanted limited federal power and more state sovereignty, and favored an agrarian nation. Anti-Federalists wanted guaranteed rights that the government couldn't take away. Discussions over matters like a Bill of Rights and judicial power were heard through the opposing papers, the Federalist Papers, published by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison under the pseudonym Publius, and the papers written anonymously under the pseudonym Brutus. These arguments went back and forth, both clarifying the Constitution and challenging it, in order to make a government truly for the people. These factions, the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, later formed into the first formal parties, being the Anti-Federalists and Democratic Republicans.
At its core, political parties stemmed from fundamentally different interpretations of the Constitution and differing opinions on what role the federal government should play in the lives of citizens. While they no longer operate under their original names, the two major political parties today, Democrats and Republicans, still argue over what role the federal government should play in national affairs. All issues ranging from foreign engagement to healthcare still center around debates over the scope of federal power. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the federal government created two major aid packages, which gave Americans stimulus checks. Despite the New York Times reporting an astounding 78% approval rating from the public, debates in Congress are still centered around whether or not the government should intervene this directly. At the end of the day, we believe that despite all the progress this nation has made, at its core, many of the United States' political strifes still stem from core differences in understanding of the role of the federal government.
A unified government is essentially when the same party controls both White House and both houses of Congress. While on the other hand, a divided government only has one party who controls the White House, along with the second party who controls one or both houses of Congress. An advantage of a unified government would include higher success and support in president decisions that allow legislators to operate a more efficient government. Some disadvantages would include possible citizen revolt or an extreme misuse of power. Although we have lived in a divided government for quite some time, we are a unified government at the moment. Some advantages of a divided government include intense debates, negotiated compromises, and will require a broad-based coalition to support new additional policies. Disadvantages would include delayed action, no progress, and an unequal decision-making. There are various advantages and disadvantages to a unified or divided government. One could argue that a divided government is better because you get opinions from both sides and parties, while on the other hand, unified must be passed through each branch. James Madison from the Federalist 14 once said, "The general government is not to be charged with the whole power of making and administering laws. Its jurisdiction is limited to certain unenumerated objects, which concern all the members of the republic, but which are not to be obtained by the separate provisions of any."
We good?
Yep.
That was terrific. That was scholarly. You took a political matter and addressed it in a very scholarly fashion. I was about to miss grammatical here. Dr. Rogers, you live a lot closer to New Jersey than Joe and I do. You want to take a shot at him first?
So let's go back to the quotation by John Adams. It's very similar to what you said George Washington had to say about parties. John Adams said, "I dread so much a division republic into two great parties." Was his dread correct in the long run, given the way our party system is operated?
I feel that Oops, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Personally, I would have to completely agree with John Adams. We see a consistent theme throughout both the Senate and the House of Representatives. How, for the most part, senators as well as representatives tend to almost form blocks of voting. And it's very rare that you see senators or or representatives going against the grain, against their party, and voting for legislation that doesn't line up with their party's values. And you would have to question whether or not this is truly each politician, their true kind of belief in that certain bill, or whether it's their allegiance to their party that has taken precedence.
I myself am pretty neutral on the matter. I feel like there are positives and negatives to political parties. One thing is that they're almost inevitable because people will try to connect with people who have the same opinions as them. So it's not that it's like they're a bad thing. It's just that, like, inherently they can just become a bad thing, as we've seen in the past with more and more polarization between the two parties.
So in our
Absolutely.
system, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that, I completely agree with what Ian said in that, the reason why this quote from John Adams is so powerful is because he specifically says two great parties. If you look at European nations and a lot of European governments, they have multi-party systems, which allow for that fluidity of thought. In the United States, we have two very clear front-running parties, Democrats and Republicans. And if your ideas fall somewhere in the middle, if you are a moderate, as it's called, you really have no political backing, which is kind of why I think that, this fear of creating two great parties is so real, because it creates this staunch divide in government that allows for almost no collaboration.
Were we better off then when we had more overlap? Some of us grew up in an era where there was what we call the conservative coalition, that the Southern Democrats would vote with Republicans, and there were liberal Republicans who would vote with Democrats. Was that the good old days, the better times?
I personally,
if you're a voter and you're trying to vote for somebody based on party, you may not be able to predict how they're going to vote if there's that overlap or coalition.
I completely agree with that idea that, it makes it harder for voters, but I actually believe that encourages voters to become more educated in who they're voting for. I believe that's a huge part of, the right to vote comes with that level of being educated on who you're voting for. Part of the problem I see today is that people vote solely based on party. They don't vote on their stances on individual issues where they truly see themselves aligning. With this idea of people being able to cross between, they're either, for example, they could be economically conservative but socially liberal. Something like that is not what we see very often anymore. And I think that having candidates like that run allow for a more unified nation.
Dr. Rogers, the question that you asked last time in the last unit that we didn't really have long enough to explore, to be sure we have enough time for it, you want to ask that one now? About whether the political parties have failed, where they failed, if they failed. You can say it better than that.
So the question is, there have been times in our history when the political party system has failed. And what lessons are there from those times of failure?
So, one example I could think of right off the bat was a couple of years ago when we had the government shutdown and a bunch of government workers got furloughed. I think that's one issue where party politics superseded the general welfare of the nation. And I believe that from those moments, we need to understand that compromise is something that both these political parties, no matter whether they have a majority in the House and Senate, whether it's a unified or divided government, no matter what, they need to be able to come to a compromise to provide for the nation. Because at the end of the day, that is their job as an elected representative. Their job is to make sure the people of their constituency are supported and they're taken care of from a legal perspective. And when the government goes through to do something like that, where they're shutting down the government, I believe that that's where party politics fails. But I don't know, John Jay, what do you think?
I would also have to agree with Ishan, because not only is it seen as a safeguard for us people, but also it stands as a safeguard for anything that can be passed unfit. kind of backing what Ishan said, as it is like a legal, as it is a legal documentation saying that for people, I would believe not only is it essential, but I also think that it might help us as well.
Yeah, I would want to take what Ishan and John Jay said a step further. I would want to say that party politics continues to fail with us to this day. And I see that personally through the filibuster in the Senate, where an individual senator, because of their party beliefs, would kind of continue to debate on a bill, continue to have debate on a bill in order to ensure that that bill is not passed and nothing is done. And that just creates loads of inefficiency within our government and shows a level of failure in our political system because of the fact that these parties cannot come to compromises and have to resort to measures like the filibuster in order for their party to essentially win on that topic.
I would respectfully have to sort of disagree. I definitely think that political parties can fail. However, while that can happen in bad consequences, it can also be, I guess what you would say, good consequences, where not that they necessarily failed, but with the era of good feelings, you see that there was almost unanimous votes for the president besides for one, and that was only in order to keep George Washington as the only unanimously elected president. So while you could say they failed, and the fact that there was no opposition, that was a good thing.
Emily, we got time for one more. How much time? We got 1 minute. Is it about political parties, or has it become about the money because it's so expensive to run? Is it that the parties can't get along, or is it that the healthcare companies, insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies on one side, nurses association on the other? Is it them that can't come together and they've paid so much money for the House and Senate members? Is it money or is it philosophy?
I would have to say it's both. I would have to say that it's the philosophy that leads to the money that allows for what they call lobbyists and for different corporations to actually fund different politicians' campaigns. And then it starts with the philosophy and then it ends with the money.
I agree, because not only is it about the philosophy and the campaigns, but it's also about or not only is it about the campaigns, it's also about the philosophy, because we see Democrats believing more in healthcare while Republicans don't believe in that. But that's not due to campaigns. That's just what they believe in. They believe everybody should have healthcare, and yeah.
Go ahead, Ashley, if you want to finish your thought.
Yeah, just everybody should have free healthcare. So that's more of an economic issue than campaigns are, I would say.
Even then, in an industry like that, that's such a money-driven healthcare, such a money-driven industry, you can't take that out of it. I don't think. I think that's got to be in the background of so many issues of that kind. Anyway, yeah, Emily, I'm with you. Let's clap for them. They just did a great job. That was really. I loved your essay was terrific, but I loved the Q&A, Joe, about as much as I did anything else. Dr. Rogers, you want to analyze a little?
Yeah, I enjoyed your presentation. You answered all parts of the questions very thoroughly. You put the focus on the differences between the parties in regard to their views of the federal system and national power. I might want to have heard a little bit more about the issues that brought that sort of central issue across, whether it's foreign policy or economic policy. That would have been good. I thought your answer to my question about dread, why was John Adams correct to dread partisanship? I thought you had good answer. I thought especially good was, well, it depends. That in some ways yes, in some ways no. And I thought the answer on the, are there failures? I think you're right. I mean, the government shutdown is a good example, excellent example. I mean, the government's no good if it can't do anything. So I thought that was good. Of course, there are other examples. I mean, starting with the Civil War, the election leading the Civil War, might have been other answers that you could have brought out there. So very informed, like mentioned, the Federalist 14, more of that would have been great. Very informative overall.
Joseph?
Yeah, I agree. This was a fun conversation, and you reflected a great deal of work. I just wish we had a lot more time on this.
Me too.
One way to enhance this would be, you mentioned Brutus early on, which I think could really bolster your case that if in fact Brutus was Melanchthon Smith, which some people suggest he is, one of the authors of an anti-federalist paper who actually voted for ratification in New York. So that's an example that would have bolstered your point about compromise. I don't, when you talk about unified government, you talked about legislative and executive. Ashley's trying to get into the judicial branch by studying law. We don't want to leave her out. To what extent do the courts play a role? Because you talk about us having unified government now, when in fact some people would say, well, wait a minute, with the Supreme Court appointments that President Trump was able to make with the consent of the Senate, we really don't have a unified government. The teacher in me says, let me give you some more reading. And so let me suggest one way of looking at this in a more sophisticated way. You point out an example of failure is a shutdown. There is a good book called Burning Down the House, in which Gerald Ford and Newt Gingrich talk about what they were trying to do when they got to the House of Representatives. Gerald Ford takes your point of view and says, I went there to get things done, to make government work. Newt Gingrich says, I went there to make sure government didn't do anything. And so the result is that it may be what you're labeling as failure, and I think a lot of people would. There are now people within government who take it as their job to make sure government doesn't get anything done. So all in all, to summarize, you just did a great job. You generated a lot of different ideas that I wish we had more time to discuss. And I have great confidence we could have a high-level conversation about these. Thank you for the talk.
Joe, I agree with every single word of that, and I'm gonna go get that book and read it because I lived through both of them, both Gerald Ford and Newt Gingrich. So I'd like to go read that. This was an example today, Dr. Rogers, it seems to me like, of a very scholarly, well-researched, well-written essay that then evolved into current events and more practical answers to Q&A about how it's really supposed to work and how it sometimes doesn't. We asked Dr. Rogers to ask a question that I hope he asks over and over the rest of the day. Emily, you're going to hear it a bunch of times about have the political parties failed. Sure they have, but the government shutdown is about as good an example that I can think of right offhand of how. Ishan, I thought that was a great answer.
Thank you.
Keep this from happening. Too many people want to, the government shutdown's fine if you've got everything you need. If you've got enough money to live on and you've got a job and your job's not going to be affected by the shutdown, who cares? But if if your child needs food, if your child needs schooling, if your child needs this or that, if your job is affected by that and you can't provide for the folks that you're partially responsible for, then it's a real failure when the government fails to protect the least and the last amongst us, it seems like. And I thought y'all did a very down-to-earth job on that. Last thing I'd say, I know that Dr. Paulson was projecting Benjamin Franklin to us in his video shot when he on video with us. But Albert, the thing it made of is watching your team perform today as a teacher, your money. You're obviously